Tonight, I'll take you to a place where the light never sleeps, and the mist keeps secrets you can only hear with your eyes closed. Breathe slowly. Let yourself drift, because the lighthouse and the mist is waiting for you in the quiet between shadows. Let's begin. The night rested heavily over the coastline, laying a cool, silvery stillness across the world. Through the moving fog, the lighthouse appeared, a solitary tower etched faintly against the dark sky. Its pale walls seemed to shimmer with each passing shift of mist. Far below, waves sighed against the rocks, not with force, but with a slow, patient rhythm, like the breathing of something ancient and gentle. Moonlight tried to reach the water, scattering softly before dissolving into the haze, leaving only a faint glow lingering in the fog. And there, unmoving in the distance, the lighthouse waited, lonely, steady, a silent guardian of the night. The sea whispered beneath the fog, its voice rising in long, gentle breaths. Each wave drifted forward with calm certainty, breaking softly over the rocks as if it feared disturbing the quiet air. Salt hung in the breeze, clinging to the fog, settling on the stones like delicate crystals. The air carried a cool sharpness, reminding the listener of winter's slow return. It wasn't a night of storms, nor a night of restless tides. It was a night that felt thoughtful, a night where every sound carried the weight of memory. The sea seemed to recall distant stories, letting them echo in the soft tumbling of the waves, an invitation to drift deeper into the quiet. Inside the lighthouse, the keeper moved patiently, his steps blending with the soft creak of the wooden floor. He approached the great lantern, its glass chilled by the night and its brass frame etched with years of dedicated work. With steady hands, he lifted the latch, struck the ignition, and waited. A small flame appeared, fragile, flickering, then grew into a warm golden glow that spilled gently across the room. The brass instruments around him reflected the light, casting amber shapes along the curved walls of the lantern chamber. For a moment, the keeper simply watched, letting the flame steady itself, a companion he would share the long night with. A sudden breeze slipped through the old window frame, bringing with it the sharp scent of the sea. The wind danced gently around the room, moving the dust in quiet spirals and brushing cold fingertips across the keeper's skin. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the chill settle, feeling the weight of the night press softly against him. The window rattled faintly, a tired sound carried through years of salt and storms. Outside, the fog shifted in slow waves, as if responding to the whispering wind. It was a reminder that the night was alive, not loud or threatening, but quietly breathing, moving with a rhythm all its own. The keeper stepped closer to the window, drawn by the shifting patterns of the fog. It rolled in long, graceful curls, sometimes thick and impenetrable, other times thin enough for a faint glimpse of the sea below. To him, The mist always felt alive, a visitor that arrived without warning and lingered long after dawn. Tonight it moved with unusual slowness, as though carrying something unseen within its pale folds. It drifted across the rocks, curling around the lighthouse base before fading into the dark. The keeper watched in silence, feeling that familiar tug of wonder, the sense that the fog held quiet secrets only the night could understand. The keeper leaned against the window frame, eyes fixed on the shifting fog. A gentle thought rose within him, a whisper from years of nights just like this. The night always brings something, even when it seems empty. He exhaled slowly, letting the calm settle deeper around him, feeling the weight of the lighthouse walls steady and familiar. Outside, the fog continued to drift, as if agreeing with his quiet reflection. The night was never truly still. He turned away from the window and let his gaze travel across the room. The lighthouse interior felt timeless. Old wooden beams worn smooth by countless nights, each carrying the faint scent of salt and smoke. The floorboards whispered softly under his steps, echoing the gentle sway of the sea outside. Shelves lined the wall, filled with charts, old instruments, and notebooks whose pages had long turned yellow. Silence filled the room, not empty, but comforting. A silence shaped by years of storms, fog, and distant tides. In that quiet space, the keeper felt the familiar peace of long, isolated nights, a solitude that never felt lonely, only steady, only true. The keeper made his way toward the spiral staircase, its iron steps coiling upward in a narrow arc. Each step held the coolness of the night, the metal chilled from the constant sea breeze that seeped through the lighthouse walls. As he climbed, the dim lantern light followed him, casting slow-moving shadows along the curved stone. The staircase groaned gently beneath his weight, an old companion responding in quiet murmurs. He placed a hand on the railing, feeling its rough texture, worn smooth in places by decades of use. With each step upward, the keeper felt the outside world fade, leaving only the calm rhythm of his ascent and the steady hum of the fog. At the top of the tower, the newly lit beacon began its slow rotation. The light stretched outward through the fog, cutting a gentle arc across the dark sea. It wasn't bright enough to pierce the thickest mist, but it didn't need to. Its purpose was persistence, not clarity. The beam passed over the cliffs, then swept across the water, catching faint glimmers where the waves rose. With every rotation, the lighthouse seemed to exhale, a soft pulse of warmth against the cold, shifting fog. The keeper watched, feeling the familiar comfort of that rhythmic glow, a promise that the night would be guided, no matter how dense the mist became. Just as the beam made another slow sweep across the water, a faint sound drifted through the fog. A bell, distant, delicate, its tone carried gently on the wind. It was the kind of sound that might have been imagined, soft enough to vanish, yet clear enough to stir something deep inside. The keeper listened closely, letting the stillness settle around him. The bell rang again, a single note stretching across the dark sea, echoing between the cliffs and the waves. He felt the slightest shift in the night, as though the fog itself were holding its breath, waiting for something just beyond sight. The keeper began his nightly routine, moving through the quiet room with practiced familiarity. He checked each lantern one by one, adjusting their wicks, brushing away dust, and ensuring the oil levels were steady. The instruments rested on a long wooden table. Old compasses, barometers, and weather gauges whose brass casings had dulled with time. He touched each one gently, as if greeting old friends who had weathered countless nights with him. The fog outside seemed to press faintly against the walls, reminding him of the world waiting beyond the lighthouse. But here, inside this small circle of warm light, everything felt steady, measured, and perfectly in place. Once the instruments were tended to, the keeper set water to heat on the small iron stove. The flame flickered softly beneath the kettle, casting a faint orange glow across the cabin walls. He reached for his tin of loose tea leaves, a simple blend of herbs and dried flowers that he saved for the coldest nights. When the kettle whistled, he poured the steaming water into his old ceramic mug, watching the leaves swirl and rise before settling into comb. The scent drifted gently through the air, blending with the faint aroma of salt and damp wood. With both hands wrapped around the warm cup, the keeper felt the night ease its chill just a little. Cradling his tea, the keeper stepped toward the window and gazed into the vast, unbroken fog. There was no horizon tonight, just a soft, endless whiteness where sea and sky blended together like a single quiet breath. The lighthouse beam stretched outward, but faded almost instantly into the thick mist as though swallowed by the night itself. He listened for distant waves, but even their steady rhythm seemed muted, caught somewhere deep within the fog's embrace. So much of the world felt hidden, as if the night were gently keeping secrets just beyond sight. The keeper sipped his tea, letting the silence settle against him like an old, familiar companion. Solitary nights were nothing new to the keeper. He had lived among them longer than he could remember. There was a gentleness to them, a kind of quiet that wrapped around the lighthouse like a comforting shroud. Sometimes he wondered if the sea felt the same, if its calm surface hid stories of long, lonely evenings beneath the moon. He inhaled deeply, smelling the cool fog that drifted through the cracks, and allowed the silence to wash over him. Solitude was not emptiness,
not to him. It was a slow, steady rhythm, a life measured in tides and lantern light. And tonight, the solitude felt almost tender. His gaze drifted toward the sea, and memories rose with the quiet rhythm of the waves. There were nights when great ships passed through the fog, their dim lights shimmering like distant stars. He remembered the soft thunder of their engines, the low hum of movement across the water, and the faint voices carried by the wind. Those ships had brought life to the darkness, brief moments of connection before disappearing again into the vast night. He wondered where they had gone, what coasts they reached, what stories their passengers carried with them. The sea held all those memories, cradled gently beneath its shifting surface. Beyond the fog, the sea lay dark and still, a vast shadowed expanse stretching into the unknown. It was a sea that carried silence like a cloak, moving only in slow, patient breaths. Occasional ripples broke against the rocks, each one subtle and weary, as though the ocean itself were half asleep. The deep water reflected no moonlight tonight. The fog devoured every glimmer before it could reach the surface. And yet there was beauty in that darkness, a quiet sorrow, a gentle depth that tugged at the keeper's heart. The sea felt old tonight, old and endlessly patient.
Just as he turned from the window, a faint cry rose from somewhere far beyond the cliffs. Seagulls, their voices thin and wandering, drifting through the dense fog. The sound was soft enough to almost disappear, yet clear enough to remind him that life still moved through the night. They called again, their cries echoing faintly against the water, as if searching for something familiar. The keeper listened quietly, feeling a small comfort in their distant presence, a reminder that he was not entirely alone. The voices faded into the fog, leaving behind a gentle hush that lingered in the cool air. The lighthouse shifted subtly as the night deepened, its old wooden beams settling with quiet creaks. The sound was soft, almost sleepy, a familiar rhythm he had heard countless times. The structure groaned gently, as though stretching after a long day, its walls remembering every storm, every gust of wind that had ever struck them. He placed a hand on the nearest beam, feeling its cool, worn surface beneath his fingertips. The lighthouse wasn't just a building, it was a companion, a witness to every passing night. And this night, it whispered softly around him, its echoes blending with the distant sea. The keeper sat at his small wooden desk, the lantern casting warm light across the yellowed pages of his journal. He dipped his pen into ink and began writing in slow, thoughtful strokes. He described the fog, the sound of the distant gulls, the calm breathing of the sea, small details that shaped each night. His handwriting wavered slightly, softened by age, but it carried the quiet precision of someone who had learned patience. On nights like this, the journal felt less like a record and more like a conversation, a way of speaking to the silence. He closed the book gently, letting the ink rest as the lighthouse hummed softly around him. At the top of the tower, the beacon continued its steady rotation, a soft, glowing heart beating within the fog. The light swept outward, cutting a gentle path through the mist, before fading once more into pale silence. For a brief moment, the fog seemed to shimmer as the beam touched it, catching fragments of moisture that sparkled like distant stars. The keeper watched from below, feeling the calm pulse of the lighthouse echo through the hollow stone walls. Each rotation felt like a reassurance, a promise that even in the thickest darkness, a guide remained. And as the fog drifted and shifted, the light kept moving, unwavering, faithful.
At first, he saw only a shadow drifting on the water, a faint shape sliding through the fog, like a forgotten memory returning to shore. As the mist shifted, the outline sharpened, a small wooden boat, empty, silent, moving without oars and without purpose. The sea carried it gently, guiding it toward the lighthouse, as though delivering something left unfinished long ago. The wood creaked softly with each wave, a tired sound, a weary traveler arriving after a long, lonely passage. From the tower, the keeper watched in stillness, a quiet tension settling in his chest. In nights like these, the sea rarely sent visitors, and when it did, it meant something. He leaned closer to the window, his breath soft against the cold glass, watching the boat drift closer through ribbons of pale fog. The mist wrapped around it in slow, deliberate movements, curling and uncurling, like ghostly hands guiding the vessel forward. No movement inside the boat, no figure, no lantern glow, just an emptiness that felt strangely intentional. The sea below him quieted, as if it too was watching, as if the entire coastline held its breath. The keeper felt solitude press gently against him, not unwelcome, but heavier than usual. This was the kind of silence that carried a message, one the night had not yet spoken. The first sound was a dull, hollow knock as the boat touched the rocks beneath the lighthouse. A gentle push from the tide shifted it again, another soft thump, like someone knocking politely on an unseen door. The wood groaned, old planks bending, tired from distance and long exposure to salt and night. The keeper listened, recognizing the weary language of things abandoned, things that had traveled far without company. The sea murmured around the rocks, low and steady, its voice almost sympathetic. And in that sound, he felt the beginning of a story the fog had carried to him. He descended the spiral staircase, each footstep echoing softly against the cold stone walls. The air grew colder as he went down, sharp with salt, dense with moisture, heavy with the scent of the sea. The old wooden door at the bottom creaked open reluctantly, its hinges singing a tired, familiar song. Fog swirled around the dock, thick enough to soften every shape, making the world look like a half-remembered dream. The boat rocked gently nearby, waiting, its presence quiet but impossible to ignore. With each step toward it, the keeper felt the night deepen, as though the story he was entering had been waiting for him. He leaned over the edge of the dock, peering into the small boat, expecting nothing, yet finding something. Inside, a single glass bottle rested between two wooden boards, tilted slightly, as if placed there intentionally. No rope, no lantern, no supplies, only the bottle, glowing faintly each time the lighthouse beam passed overhead. A curl of paper waited inside, protected from the sea by a cork swollen with moisture. He reached for it slowly, fingers brushing droplets of salt from its smooth surface. This was no stray object, no accident of the waves. This felt delivered. He held the bottle carefully, turning it in his hands as the fog pressed closer around him. The cork resisted at first, tight, swollen, clinging to the neck as though guarding the message inside. With a soft twist and a gentle pull, it finally released with a quiet pop that seemed louder in the stillness of the night. He tipped the bottle upside down, letting the rolled paper slide slowly, delicately, into his palm. The edges were frayed, the ink faded, as though the words had traveled farther than the boat itself. Whatever waited on that paper, the sea had guarded it well.
He unrolled the paper carefully, aware of how fragile each crease had become. The ink shimmered faintly under the shifting lighthouse beam, a whisper of handwriting, soft and trembling. And then a voice seemed to rise from the page, distant, tired, carrying the weight of something left unsaid. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but the tone, the sorrow in it was unmistakable. He felt the words more than heard them, as if they had been written not for the eyes, but for the quiet places inside the heart. Someone, somewhere had sent this message into the world, hoping it would reach a listener. He lowered the paper, letting the silence settle around him. The message lingered in his thoughts, its sadness, its longing, its unfinished edges. He whispered to himself, "Who could have written this?" The question drifting into the fog like a breath carried away by the wind. No name, no date, no destination. Just a feeling, a quiet ache left behind for someone willing to listen. And in that moment, the keeper realized the sea rarely brought answers, only invitations to follow its mysteries. The keeper lifted the page again, and this time the voice felt clearer, a soft tone, gentle, trembling as though the writer was speaking across great distance or great time. They spoke of a memory, half faded, half haunting, a night lost in fog, a farewell never completed. The keeper listened, letting every word echo through the quiet dock. The visitor's voice was delicate, like something that could vanish with the next wave. And yet it felt close, near, as if the writer stood only a few steps away, just out of sight. He rolled the message gently and placed it back inside the bottle, protecting it as carefully as a fragile memory. With slow steps, he carried it toward the lighthouse door, the fog parting for him like a quiet curtain. Inside, the stone walls felt warmer, as though they recognized what he now carried. He set the bottle on a wooden shelf near the lantern room, where old, meaningful objects had rested before. The flame from the tower passed overhead, casting a soft glow on the glass. The story wasn't finished. The sea had delivered the first piece, and the night would bring the rest.
The keeper sat in silence as the visitor's voice floated gently from the message, a soft recollection unfolding like mist over calm water. The memory spoke of a quiet harbor, a lantern swinging in the wind, a promise whispered beneath starlight, and footsteps fading along a wooden pier. Each word felt delicate, like something rescued from the edge of forgetting. The visitor recalled the shape of a smile, a hand slipping away, the echo of a goodbye never fully spoken. The keeper listened, feeling the weight of someone else's sorrow rest gently against his own. Some memories do not sleep. They drift, waiting to be heard. The keeper felt the memory stirring something within him. A drawer full of old papers, ink long dried, words he had written but never dared to send. He opened the small wooden box where he kept them, folded notes, unfinished thoughts, quiet confessions that time had turned weightless. One letter trembled slightly between his fingers, as if it still hoped to reach its destination. He remembered writing it during a stormy night, the waves roaring, the lighthouse trembling, and his heart uncertain. The visitor's story had stirred the old ache he thought had faded. Some messages, even unsent, never truly stay silent. He set the letters aside and moved toward the small kettle sitting near the lantern heat. The soft hiss of steam filled the quiet room, gentle, comforting, like an old friend exhaling after a long day. As he poured the tea, the liquid whispered against the ceramic cup, a delicate soothing sound that warmed the cold edges of the night. The fragrance drifted upward, herbal, calm, mixing with the salt carried from the sea. He held the cup in both hands, letting the warmth seep slowly into his tired bones. In nights of deep memory, tea had always been his quiet anchor.
As he raised the cup to his lips, the lighthouse beam swept outward again, long, steady, cutting gently through the thickening fog. And far beyond the reach of cliffs, a faint silhouette appeared, a ship hardly more than a shadow, gliding whisper-like across the horizon. The keeper narrowed his eyes, feeling the familiar stir of curiosity and a quiet concern. The ship did not seem to move quickly, almost drifting, as though it were following a forgotten route. The light touched its bow, then slipped away, leaving the vessel swallowed again by mist. Some travelers carried stories as heavy as the sea itself. Outside, the fog grew bolder, rolling in heavy waves, crawling up the stone walls of the lighthouse tower. It swallowed the edges of the world, softening every shape until only silhouettes remained. The keeper felt the air shift, thicker, colder, full of whispers held tightly within the mist. He opened the window slightly, and the fog drifted inside like a shy visitor seeking warmth. It carried the scent of wet rope, old storms, and countless nights just like this one. The memory inside the bottle seemed to grow more vivid as the fog deepened. As the keeper unfolded the message again, another memory surfaced, this one warmer, yet aching at the edges. The visitor wrote of a love once held gently, a voice that softened storms, a presence that made the world feel less heavy. But love, the message said, can slip away as quietly as a tide withdrawing from the shore. The visitor's words trembled, not from fear, but from longing, a longing the sea could not wash away. The keeper felt a familiar ache tighten in his chest. Some loves don't disappear. They simply drift where we can no longer reach. He closed the message gently, letting the silence speak for a moment. The visitor's story echoed in him, a mirror of quiet loneliness, of nights spent listening to the sea's endless murmurs. He wondered how many souls had stood in this lighthouse before him, waiting, remembering, longing. He felt the thin line between solitude and peace, between isolation and quiet refuge. The night held both, offering neither completely. And in that uncertainty, the keeper found a strange comfort. A faint cry rose from beyond the cliff, the sound of gulls, but softer, farther than before. Their voices felt distant, blurred by fog, as if they were calling from another memory altogether. The keeper listened, the melancholic song reminding him of dawns long past. Each cry echoed gently and dissolved into the thick night sky. It was strange, he thought, how even the birds sounded lonelier on nights like this. Their fading voices felt like reminders of the world outside the fog. A quiet gust of wind slipped through the open window. Cool, gentle, carrying tiny droplets of drifting mist. It brushed against his hands, his face, as if the night itself was reaching out to be acknowledged. The flame in the lantern trembled softly, casting delicate shadows that swayed across the walls. The lighthouse exhaled, wood creaking, stones settling, embracing the cold air. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the breeze carry away the weight of the visitor's story. But memories, once awakened, rarely fade so quickly. When he stepped outside again, the boat that had carried the message was moving once more, nudged gently by the slow push of the tide. It drifted away without ceremony, turning slightly, as though offering a silent farewell before disappearing into the gray curtain of mist. The keeper watched, hands resting at his sides, feeling a quiet ache rise and fall within him. The sea had brought a story, and now it carried the vessel back into its wide, unreachable depths. He stood there until the last shadow vanished. And in that final absence, the night felt heavier and somehow more alive. The fog began to move, not drifting, but pulsing, as though the night itself was breathing in silence. Each swell of mist rose gently, curling upward like pale smoke from an unseen fire. The keeper stood still, watching the fog expand and contract, a living veil, shifting in rhythms almost too quiet to notice. With every breath of the fog, the world around him seemed to change, shapes dissolving, then reforming, as though the night was deciding what to reveal. He felt the air thicken, cold, damp, carrying the faint taste of salt and something older. And somewhere within that breathing haze, something was waiting. From within the thickening haze, a shape emerged, fragile at first, like a shadow hesitating at the edge of a dream. The silhouette swayed gently, barely more than a darker smudge against the pale fog. With each rotation of the lighthouse beam, the figure sharpened, revealing hints of form, the curve of a shoulder, the lean outline of someone standing still. The keeper narrowed his eyes, unsure if the figure was real or merely another illusion the fog loved to create. But then the shape moved, a slow step forward, soft enough to seem unintentional. Whoever stood there seemed to belong to the night itself. A faint sound rose through the quiet, soft, uneven, like gentle tapping on hollow boards. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, spread across the wooden deck beneath the tower. The wet planks responded with small, weary creaks, echoing upward through the lighthouse's stone spine. The keeper felt each step like a delicate vibration through the soles of his boots. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. The fog muffled the world, yet somehow the sound of those footsteps cut through the stillness with unsettling clarity. Someone or something had come closer.
He reached for his small lantern, a modest, rust-rimmed thing with a trembling wick and a handle worn smooth by years. When he lit it, the flame flickered anxiously, as though unsure how to exist within such heavy fog. The lantern cast a soft halo around his hands, barely pushing back the darkness, yet offering just enough warmth to steady his breath. He lifted it higher, letting the thin circle of light guide his steps toward the beach. The flames swayed with each movement, creating fragile shapes on the ground, shadows dancing and breaking beneath his feet. In nights like this, a small light meant everything. At the edge of the coastline, where the fog met the dark waves, something glinted faintly. It lay half buried in the wet sand, a small metallic shape that looked impossibly out of place. The keeper crouched, letting the lantern's glow wash gently over the object, revealing its smooth surface and cold frame. It wasn't driftwood. It wasn't debris. It was something crafted, something once held and perhaps once cherished. A whisper of recognition stirred deep in his mind, though he could not yet name it. The night had delivered another mystery. He brushed away the sand and lifted the object carefully, revealing the ornate face of an old pocket watch. Its metal was tarnished, its surface etched with delicate patterns almost lost to time. The glass covering the clock face was cracked in thin fractures, like the lines of an aging smile. He pressed the side gently, and the watch opened with a soft, reluctant click, a sound that carried far more weight than its size suggested. Inside, the hands were frozen, stuck at a time that felt strangely familiar. A memory stirred, but did not fully rise.
He held the watch close, feeling its cold surface rest against his palm. Time, a thing he once followed closely, now felt like a visitor that rarely stayed. He thought of nights that stretched into years, of tides that rose and fell while his world remained still. He wondered how many hours he had watched pass from the tower above, the turning gears of the lighthouse becoming his only measure of life. And now, a forgotten clock had washed ashore to remind him that time still moved, even here in the quiet edges of the world. As he closed the watch, a faint sound rose from within, so faint he almost missed it. A tick, weak, irregular, like the heartbeat of something trying to live again. He held the watch to his ear, listening as the fragile rhythm wavered in and out of silence. It was barely alive, yet undeniably there, a whisper of time stirring back into motion. The keeper felt an unexpected shiver, not from cold, but from the sense that this watch had not drifted here by accident. The night had turned, and something was coming. A figure stood by the water's edge, a silhouette against the gray sea. The keeper froze, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. A small figure, clothed in darkness, standing perfectly still. He turned toward the silhouette, but the figure was gone. No footsteps, no shadow, not even a shape dissolving into the mist. It was as if the fog had simply swallowed the visitor whole, or as if they had never been there at all. The wooden planks were undisturbed, the shoreline untouched, the silence deepening where presence had stood. He called out once, a soft, cautious sound, but the fog returned no answer. Only the sea remained, constant, ancient, and indifferent. With the watch held carefully in his hand, the keeper walked back toward the tower. The lantern swayed beside him, its small flame flickering with each breath of wind. The lighthouse loomed above, a familiar guardian rising from the rocks. He stepped onto the wooden deck, feeling the boards respond with soft creaks that echoed faintly upward. As he climbed the spiral stairs, the pulse of the tower, the steady rotation of its great light, greeted him like the beat of an old heart, and he realized the night was not yet done with him.
It began as a faint whisper, a thin thread of sound woven into the hush of the night. Breathe. The keeper paused, closing his eyes to listen more closely, the murmur rising and fading like someone speaking from beneath deep water, slow. It wasn't the wind, nor the sea. It was something softer, something shaped into syllables he almost recognized. Breathe. The sound drifted between the stones of the lighthouse walls, curling through the cracks like smoke seeking warmth, slow. He felt chills trace his spine, not of fear, but of the strange familiarity in that voice. Breathe. As though the past had learned to speak again. Fade. The fog pressed against the windows, soft at first, then firmer, like waves of breath rolling across the glass. Breathe. Each impact was muted, a gentle thump, followed by a slow sigh as the mist slid downward in trembling trails, slow. The lantern's glow inside caught the patterns of moisture, turning them into pale silver lines that shimmered and vanished. Breathe. A hollow sound echoed faintly, the kind of noise that makes a quiet room feel suddenly smaller, slow. The keeper rested his hand against the cold pane, feeling the night press back. Breathe. The fog wanted in, fade. On the lowest step of the tower, he found it, a journal, soaked at the edges, its pages swollen with seawater. Breathe. It lay as though placed there gently, not dropped by chance, the damp cover glistening under the lantern's fragile circle of light, slow. He picked it up carefully, feeling the soft weight of its water-heavy pages. Breathe. The smell of salt clung to it, the scent of long journeys,
forgotten storms, and memories half-drowned, slow. In the center of the cover was a single word, a name, perhaps, barely legible, breathe. It felt like the sea had delivered a message meant only for him, fade.
He opened the journal with careful hands, each page peeling away from the next with a wet whisper. Scrawled handwriting filled the pages, notes, sketches, short fragments of voyages taken across restless waters. There were names of ships, coordinates, descriptions of storms that bent masts and swallowed stars. The entries spoke of men who chased horizons and found only fog, of nights when voices were heard on empty seas. Some passages were missing, washed away, or torn free. The keeper read on, feeling each word like a weight returning to him. As he read, the murmur returned, but this time it had shape, tone, a trembling humanity. It was the diarist's voice, soft, weathered, speaking from somewhere between memory and absence. The voice described a forgotten port, a storm that came without warning, a lover waiting on a pier who never saw the ship return. It felt less like hearing a story and more like standing inside a memory, not his own. Each word carried sorrow, not heavy, but tired, like a soul that had traveled too far. He closed the journal gently, but the voice lingered. Through the highest window, he saw faint lights, small glimmers scattered along the horizon. At first, he thought they were stars breaking through the haze. But stars don't sway, and these lights pulsed softly, as though carried by distant ships. He leaned closer, watching the tiny glimmers fade and brighten in gentle rhythms. It had been years since he'd seen vessels cross this part of the coast. Yet tonight, the horizon flickered with signs of life. He whispered to himself, a habit learned from nights spent alone. "The sea brings what one does not expect," he murmured. He thought of the journal, the whispering voice, the lights moving faintly across the distant water. Some nights the sea brought driftwood, some nights storms, and some brought memories that did not belong to him. He closed his eyes and listened to the water thrum softly below. Tonight's gifts felt heavier than most. A bell rang across the water, low, trembling, then again, louder this time. It sounded old, weather-beaten, the kind of bell found on ships forgotten by their own captains. The tone carried through the fog, vibrating softly against the stone tower. Each ring seemed closer, as though the source was drifting toward the lighthouse. The keeper felt the faint echo in his chest, a call answered by something deep inside him. The sea was speaking again. The mist began to drift upward, curling around the tower in slow, deliberate motions. It slid along the stones like pale fingers reaching for warmth. The windows blurred, the glass frosting over with thin layers of moisture that distorted the lantern's glow. It felt less like weather and more like presence, as though the fog had chosen the tower as its destination. The keeper stepped back, watching the night wrap itself tighter around the lighthouse. Something was drawing nearer. The cold seeped through the cracks, chilling his fingertips. He reached for the window, pushing it shut with a slow, steady motion. The latch clicked into place, a small, fragile sound against the restless night. The room grew quieter, warmer, though the fog still pressed against the glass like a curious visitor. He drew the curtains, letting the lantern's faint glow fill the room once more. For a brief moment he allowed himself to breathe without listening for whispers. The keeper stepped out into the night, closing the lighthouse door behind him with a quiet, familiar sound. The cliffside path stretched ahead, a thin ribbon carved by years of footsteps and wind, guiding him toward the sea's restless edge. He walked slowly, letting the cool air settle into his lungs. The sky above was muted, heavy clouds drifting without intent, threads of moonlight slipping through just long enough to soften the world around him. Each step felt like a return to a memory half forgotten, a path he had walked countless times, yet still approached with reverence. Below him, the ocean breathed against the rocks, ancient and deliberate, its voice rising and falling like something tired of being heard but unwilling to stop. And as he walked along the cliff, he sensed the night watching him, patient, silent, as though waiting for him to remember why he came. The gravel beneath his boots shifted with every step, producing a soft, uneven crunch that echoed gently through the quiet night. The moisture of the evening had seeped into the ground, making the stones darker, heavier, and more resonant. His footsteps formed a steady rhythm, a fragile metronome keeping pace with the slow pull of the tide below. The sound lingered briefly before dissolving into the mist, swallowed by the vastness that surrounded him. The path glimmered faintly under the moon's pale glow, wet grains reflecting scattered points of light like forgotten stars trapped in the earth. The air carried hints of distant storms, the scent of weather still roaming far out at sea. With each step he felt grounded, tethered to something real in an otherwise shifting night. And as he moved forward, the gravel's quiet song guided him, urging him deeper into memory's restless edge. He paused at a clearing along the cliff where the land opened wide and offered an unobstructed view of the sea. The water glowed faintly beneath the moon's soft silver, rising and falling with a slow rhythm that felt older than the world itself. Gentle waves brushed against one another, creating shimmering lines of light that danced briefly before fading into the dark. Fog drifted lazily across the surface, softening the moon's reflection until it resembled a lantern floating on a distant shore. He stood there, letting the scene settle quietly within him. The ocean felt like a memory, vast, patient, carrying stories it never fully revealed. Each wave seemed to whisper fragments of something familiar, something he once knew but could no longer name. And in the moonlit stillness, he sensed the sea watching him back, gentle, expectant, as though waiting for him to hear what it had been saying all along.
A soft breeze rose from the sea, drifting upward until it reached the cliff where he stood. It carried with it the unmistakable scent of salt, sharp, ancient, cleansing, mixed with the cold breath of distant waters. He closed his eyes for a moment and inhaled deeply, letting the air settle into him. The smell was familiar, comforting in a way only time and solitude could teach. It spoke of countless nights spent watching the horizon, waiting for lights that never appeared or vanished too quickly to name. The wind brushed against his cheeks, stirring faint memories he couldn't quite grasp. It felt like the echo of something once cherished, carried back to him across years he had tried to forget. In that scent, the sea held its history, its grief, its hope. And as the breeze faded, he opened his eyes again, feeling subtly changed, as though the night had whispered something only he was meant to hear. He walked a little farther, letting the memories rise gently, unforced, unhurried. Nights from long ago drifted back to him like fragile embers floating on the wind, glowing for a moment before dimming into shadow. He remembered laughter carried on the breeze, hands he once held, voices that had faded so gradually he failed to notice when they disappeared completely. The sea had been witness to all of it, storing his joys and losses like a keeper of secrets. Some memories stung softly, like the cold nip of winter air. Others warmed him, even now, like lantern light glowing against frost-covered windows. Every recollection felt suspended, hovering between presence and absence. And as he continued along the cliff, he realized the night did not remind him out of cruelty, but out of longing, for stories once lived to be acknowledged again. When he reached the small curve of shoreline below the cliff, something caught his eye, a faint glint amid the sand, subtle yet persistent. He knelt slowly, brushing aside grains until a small, rusted hook emerged. It was old, worn by salt and time, its metal dulled into a soft, weathered brown. Yet despite its age, it felt strangely deliberate, as though placed there for him to find. He turned it between his fingers, feeling the roughness, the story etched into its surface. Memories stirred again, of fishermen who once lived along this coast, of stories shared beside lantern light, of hands that shaped tools with quiet devotion. The hook seemed to hum with echoes of those forgotten lives. And as he held it, he felt the night lean closer, urging him to remember the people the sea had carried away. As he rose, he heard it, a faint voice carried across the wind, barely more than a whisper. It spoke with the softness of memory, the fragility of something long untold. The words were indistinct, blurred by distance, but he recognized the tone, the voice of an old fisherman who once lived along this coast, a man whose stories were woven into every corner of the sea. The voice drifted through the night as though searching for a listener, recounting snippets of days long gone, storms survived, losses endured, hopes never realized. The sound tightened something in his chest, stirring both longing and sorrow. He closed his eyes, letting the whisper curl around him like mist, and for a moment he felt the past standing beside him, gentle, persistent, unwilling to fade.
He turned his gaze upward toward the cliff he had descended. From below, the lighthouse rose like a silent guardian, its lantern glowing faintly through the drifting fog. The beam rotated with patient determination, sweeping across the night in slow, deliberate arcs. From this angle, the tower seemed taller, older, almost burdened by the memories it held within its stone walls. He watched the light cut through the mist, illuminating fragments of the shoreline before fading back into darkness. It felt like the heartbeat of the coast, steady, unwavering, a quiet reminder that even the loneliest places carried their own kind of devotion. And as the glow washed over him, he felt a small, unexpected comfort, as though the lighthouse recognized him and welcomed him home. He stood still, allowing silence to settle fully around him. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Only the sea continued its endless rhythm, whispering against the rocks below. The waves were slow tonight, curling gently as though exhausted by their own persistence. Their sound wrapped around him, soft, steady, almost lullaby-like, filling every empty space the night had carved. He let the moment stretch, unbroken. No thoughts pressed against him, no memories demanded attention. There was simply the sea, moving with ancient patience, and the quiet hum of wind brushing past his coat. In that long pause, he felt himself dissolve into the landscape, part of the cliff, part of the ocean, part of the night, whole and briefly unburdened. Eventually, he turned back toward the path, the night guiding him with gentle certainty. His footsteps were slower now, as though each one carried the remnants of everything he had remembered along the shore. The lighthouse waited above, glowing like a quiet promise. Its light brushed the cliffside in soft, wavering strokes, welcoming him with the familiarity of a home that never questioned his return. He climbed the final steps, feeling the cool stone beneath his hand. When he reached the door, he paused, listening to the sea's fading murmur one last time. Then he stepped inside, closing the night behind him. The lantern light warmed his face, and for a brief, fragile moment, he allowed himself to breathe in peace. The lighthouse interior glowed gently, its lantern swaying with each subtle pulse of the night. The light rose, fell, and rose again, like a tired heartbeat trying to stay awake. Shadows stretched across the curved stone walls, curling and folding, as if remembering the years they had clung to this place. Dust drifted lazily through the beam, turning the air into a quiet river of golden particles, floating without direction. The keeper watched it sway, feeling the familiar comfort of something steady, something that hadn't abandoned him. And though the world outside was dense with fog, inside, the trembling light kept whispering its small, faithful warmth. He lifted the old clock, its metal cold against his palm. The hands ticked forward, hesitant, deliberate, as though time itself were unsure whether to continue. He traced the rim with a quiet familiarity, feeling every dent and scratch left by decades of storms and sleepless nights. The ticking echoed across the room, a soft rhythm that felt almost louder than the lantern's glow. Minutes passed like drifting tides, sliding forward without urgency, yet never stopping. And as he listened, he wondered if the clock remembered
all the hours it had once guarded, or if time too eventually forgot who had waited for it. A thin thread of fog slipped through a narrow crack near the window frame. It curled inward, slow, deliberate, like a curious visitor deciding whether to enter. The cold it carried brushed against his wrist, raising small goosebumps as if the night itself had reached out to touch him. The fog drifted along the floor, spreading in quiet spirals that dissolved into the lantern's faint warmth. He closed the crack with gentle pressure, yet the fog lingered, hovering like memory refusing to be shut out. And for a moment he felt the strange weight of old stories trying to seep in through places he thought were sealed. From somewhere within the fog, a voice whispered his name. It wasn't loud, nor urgent, just gentle enough to feel familiar. He froze, listening as the sound drifted upward, as though carried by hands that no longer belonged to this world. The voice echoed against the glass, sliding along the window sills in a soft, trembling ripple. He whispered back, not out of fear, but out of the quiet hope that memory might answer. And in the stillness that followed, only the fog moved, as if guarding the echo of a name spoken long ago. A memory rose within him, uninvited, but gentle enough not to resist. He saw a face from long ago, softened by time, half hidden behind the glow of a much younger lantern. There was laughter in that memory, quiet, fleeting, a sound that now felt too fragile to touch. He remembered a promise whispered on a night much like this one, when the fog had carried more hope than sorrow. The warmth of the moment faded, leaving only the echo of someone who had once waited for him by the shore. And as the memory dissolved, he felt the weight of years settle softly across his chest. He reached for the small lamp, its brass frame cool beneath his fingertips. With a careful flick, the flame awakened, a tiny spark blooming into a quiet glow. The lamp's flame fluttered as though reacting to a presence he could not see. Its warmth spread slowly, touching the corners of the room where shadows clung like sleeping memories. And as the glow grew steadier, he felt a strange comfort, as if this small flame had been waiting to guide him through the night. A soft thud broke the silence. The diary had slipped from the shelf, landing open on the wooden floor, its pages trembling as if startled awake. He knelt beside it, careful not to disturb the delicate edges darkened by time and salt. The open page revealed handwriting, curved and graceful, a style untouched by haste. The ink shimmered faintly under the lamp's warm glow, as though the words themselves still carried breath. And he wondered whether the diary had fallen by chance, or because some stories refuse to remain closed. His eyes lingered on a single sentence, a line written with unmistakable certainty. "I will return when the mist allows." The words shimmered as though the ink still carried warmth from the hand that wrote them. He traced the phrase lightly, feeling the weighted promise hidden beneath each letter. The room seemed to still around him, the lantern dimming as though listening. And as the fog pressed more firmly against the windows, he whispered the sentence aloud, letting its quiet ache fill the room once more. For a moment, the sea outside grew impossibly calm. No waves broke, no wind stirred, only silence, a deep, suspended hush. He stepped closer to the window, listening to the stillness as if the ocean were holding its breath. A faint glimmer stretched across the surface, reflecting the lantern's glow in soft, trembling lines. The calm felt unnatural, a quiet too perfect for a night so heavy with fog. And yet, in that fragile silence, he sensed something watching, something waiting just beyond the mist's veil. He inhaled deeply, letting the cool air settle inside him. With each breath, the weight of the night pressed softly against his ribs, not painful, just present. The fog outside swirled in slow spirals, as if matching the rhythm of his breathing. He closed his eyes, allowing the quiet to wrap around him like a familiar, worn blanket. There was comfort in the stillness, but also an ache, a reminder of voices he once knew well. And as he exhaled, the lighthouse seemed to breathe with him, sharing the quiet sorrow of a night shaped by memory.
The fog, once thick and unbroken, began to loosen its hold on the night. It drifted upward in pale ribbons, unwinding like a tired spirit, finally ready to rest. The coastline emerged piece by piece, a stone here, a patch of grass there, as if the world were being redrawn in gentle strokes. The keeper watched the transformation, feeling the quiet shift as the night exhaled its long, heavy breath. Every inch of revealed horizon felt like a memory returning after years spent wandering. And as the last layer drifted away, he sensed the fog's farewell, soft, patient, and full of things left unsaid. He unlatched the window, its hinges sighing softly as he pushed it open. The clear sea stretched out before him, gleaming like polished obsidian under the fading moon. The air felt new, crisp, unburdened, as though washed clean by the fog's long departure. When he leaned into the gentle breeze, the salt touched his lips with the familiar bitterness of countless nights spent here. For the first time in hours, he could see the line of the horizon, steady, unwavering, and the keeper whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "The night is changing. I can feel it." He scanned the shoreline, searching for the small drifting boat that had once carried the visitor. But the water lay empty, smooth, unmarked, as if the vessel had never existed. A faint ache settled in his chest, not out of loss, but out of understanding,
Some arrivals are meant to leave quietly. The waves reached the rocks with a gentleness unusual for morning, as though honoring the boat's silent departure. He stepped closer to the window frame, eyes focused on the spot where he last saw it float. And though the sea offered no explanation, he felt a strange peace, as if farewells, too, could be soft.
A faint clink echoed from below. A delicate sound, almost shy. He looked down to see it. The same bottle, resting gently against the rocks, its glass catching the dawn light. He descended the stairs slowly, each step ringing with familiarity, and reached for the bottle's smooth, salt-marked surface. Inside, a new message waited. The paper curled like a sleeping leaf, edges damp but intact. His fingers trembled as he eased a cork free, letting the quiet scent of the sea escape once more. And he wondered, as he unfolded the note, why some messages return, even when their senders do not. As he opened the message, a gentle voice rose, soft, familiar, like a memory speaking aloud. "Thank you," the vizier whispered, as though the fog itself carried the words. There was warmth in the tone, a gratitude untouched by distance or time. The voice drifted around him, light as sea foam, wrapping the air in a quiet tenderness that made his breath slow. He closed his eyes, letting the sound settle in his chest like a final gift, and as the voice faded, he felt not emptiness, but completeness, as though some long open chapter had gently closed. He looked down at the message, its ink soft and wavering, and felt the weight of years press gently against him. Time, he thought, was a tide, coming and going, taking pieces of moments and returning others unexpected. He remembered nights filled with waiting, with searching the fog for shapes that never came. And yet, in fleeting visits like this, he understood that memory was not a burden, but a lantern, a light that softened the past, guided the present, and lingered, even after footsteps faded. He pressed the message to his chest, whispering, "Some moments are meant to be kept." The great lantern above him turned with a slower, more deliberate rhythm. Each rotation felt like a long breath, a gentle easing, as if the lighthouse itself were settling into the dawn. The beams swept across the quiet sea, painting soft arcs of pale gold over calming waters. The keeper listened to its steady groan, the familiar sound that had shaped his nights for countless years. And yet, today there was something tender in the movement, a softness that felt like goodbye. He rested his hand on the iron railing, feeling the slow, loyal pulse of the light that never failed him. The wind, once heavy with mist, now drifted away in gentle waves. It whispered against the stones, sliding past the tower with the softness of a final farewell. The air warmed slightly, carrying the distant scent of morning instead of the night's cold breath. Small eddies swirled beneath the balcony, then dissolved calmly as the breeze loosened its grip. He watched it go,
feeling the strange stillness that followed departures not meant to be chased. And as the wind faded, he sensed the end of something, not sorrowful, just natural, like a page turning itself. He placed his hand upon the railing, feeling its cool metal warm slowly beneath his touch. The sea below breathed steadily, rhythmic, soft, as if matching his heartbeat. A quiet peace spread through him, the kind that arrives only after long nights filled with unanswered echoes. He looked toward the horizon, now clear and open, a promise instead of a mystery. In this stillness he felt whole, as though the fog's visit had brushed some hidden corner of him clean. And with a steady breath, he whispered into the gentle air, "I'm ready for whatever comes next." He stepped back inside the lighthouse, letting the warm interior wrap around him like a quiet embrace. The lantern hummed softly above, its glow steady and reassuring, a companion in the thinning night. He ran his fingers along the worn stone wall, feeling the texture of every year he had lived within these circles of light. The message lay folded in his pocket, its presence gentle, comforting. He paused at the doorway, eyes drifting to the peaceful sea one final time. And in a whisper meant only for the dawn, he spoke the truth that lingered in his chest. The night leaves, but the memory remains.